Hello, this is Sam, and welcome to the Unit 1 recap video, and we'll also have a preview of Unit 2, which is already underway. But what I'm going to try to do in this video is just react and summarize a few of the ideas that came up in Unit 1 when we were talking about grading and talking about our readings and things. And normally this kind of video would come right away on Monday, right after the unit concludes, but Monday was a holiday, and then Tuesday I had my undergrad class and some other meetings, and so it just didn't really happen, so I'm getting it to you here on Wednesday, but normally this will come on Monday to kind of transition between units. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about Unit 1. What we really want to talk about here in the video is your discussion of grades. There was a great discussion online about what do grades really mean and digging into how to weight grades, what messages it sends to students. And one of the big ideas that came up from a lot of people and that we wanted to summarize here was the idea that grades are not one unified thing. Even though we give students one letter grade or we give them one percentage, like you got an 81% in the class, it's actually not one unified concept or one unified thing. It's really a combination of at least two different components. It's the mathematics knowledge and performance that students have exhibited through the class, but it's also the students' studiousness, like how well they followed the rules, did things on time, did what you were expecting them to do. And those two things might be related, but they can also be separate. Stephanie was one of the people who identified this distinction, and she talked about it as the mathematician side and the student side of what we are looking for from the learners. And Lindsay is another one who alluded to these two separate components when she wrote, "The letter grades are not directly associated with an amount of knowledge on the subject." So I think what Lindsay's saying there is that the grade is not just directly and only a measure of math knowledge, it's incorporating other things, what we're kind of calling the studiousness here. And the fact that both components are merged together into one grade leads to four situations that are worth considering, and all four of these situations came up in one way or another. A lot of times this is how people would bring up examples of kinds of students and what grades they would receive. And the way we see it, you could have strong math with high studiousness. In that case, the grade that's given is probably going to be a high grade, and that's going to seem like a fair grade. You could also have weak math and low studiousness, and in that case you would have a low grade, but that also seems like a fair grade for what the student has done in that case. This would be like a student who doesn't do well on the quizzes, tests, or the mathematics performance items, and they also don't always get their things in on time, they don't always follow the expectations of how to behave, how the class is supposed to run. In both those cases, the grade that should be given seems fairly clear, non-controversial. But then there's these other two quadrants, strong math with low studiousness or weak math with high studiousness. And both of those were interesting to discuss, and people had some debates online about how to handle those. What kind of grades should you give? With strong math and low studiousness, you could say, well, they should get a high grade because they have exhibited that they know the mathematics that they were supposed to know. They've met all of the mathematical goals for the course, for example. But they just maybe didn't turn everything in, or they maybe didn't do everything on time, or they weren't always there like you wanted them to be there. But they have the math knowledge. So is it fair to lower their grade when they actually learned everything they were supposed to learn? On the flip side, having weak math and high studiousness, these are students that might have some gaps in their math knowledge. They might have some skills that are fairly weak, and they're not really to the mathematical place that you would want them to be. But they're very highly studious. They turn everything on time. They come and ask you for extra points. They're always kind of checking on every point that they might have missed, and they are very well put together in terms of being organized, but they might not actually have as strong a math knowledge. So that one is the case, do they kind of earn the A because they just did everything that was expected of them, or do they not get an A or B because they really don't have as strong a math knowledge as we want? So that gets to be trickier because the reason it's tricky is because we have merged these two things together and we're trying to give just one letter grade to them. So faced with this kind of dilemma, Monique actually brought up the idea of just separating them out and having an achievement score and then an effort score. And that's how the International Baccalaureate system does it, that Monique is familiar with. So that's one idea. In the standards-based grading unit, we're going to get to some other ideas about how to resolve some of these kind of controversial areas where it's not clear about the grading. And really, if you think about it, a lot of students might fall into those two quadrants that are kind of controversial quadrants. Christina brought up another point about the grading scale, and she said that as I studied the grading scale, the thing that really stuck out to me is that it seems that grades are based on what students learn or know the first time. Since there are no chances for students to retest or make corrections, 50% of the student's grades come from an assessment that there is no chance to improve on. So this is a really important idea brought up by Christina and others, that students should have room to learn, which means they shouldn't be held completely accountable just for the first time that they try something. So this is important to create a culture where students can make mistakes, where students recognize that it's a process to learn something and that it's not just a snap of the fingers and, oh, I've got it. As soon as the teacher says it, I know it perfectly. That's not very realistic, and that's not a very good culture to have where everybody can be included. So allowing for chances to grow and retake things or retry, and hey, you didn't get it the first time, but maybe down the road you will improve and show your mathematics understanding. There needs to be some sort of opening for that. And again, we'll talk about some of these ideas in the standards-based grading unit, because that's one thing standards-based grading tries to do, is give students opportunity to grow over time and not just have one shot at the test and then you're done and that score is in the book. Another thing from Unit 1 was the Burkhart reading that we discussed, and there were a lot of ideas from Burkhart, and he brings up quite a few things, some of them controversial, some of them, you could kind of really agree with, just a lot of ideas thrown into that chapter. So we wanted to put that here in Unit 1 so that we could maybe make connections to a lot of Burkhart's ideas as we go through future units. One thing we wanted to highlight here was the idea that what you test is what you get. This is kind of a guiding principle of just assessment in general, and it's kind of a reality of teaching. And usually what you test is what you get refers to the math knowledge side of things, and the math knowledge side particularly as it relates to standardized tests. So teachers and districts will just naturally, and you can't really blame them for this, they'll consolidate around the content of the high stakes tests. So if it's on the test, teachers and districts will make sure that they're hitting it. If it's not on the test, it will gradually kind of get pushed to the side and students might not have opportunities to learn it. This idea of what you test is what you get is also important within your own personal classroom. If you test procedures and memorization, then students know that that's what you truly value. No matter how many times you give lip service to problem solving and justifying, if the tests are procedural and basically the tests are just doing exactly what you showed them how to do, then students get the message. They know that that's really what is important, and that's what the students will take away from math. But if you really value problem solving, justifying, looking for structure, communication, then you have to find some way to have those be on the tests. Otherwise, you're not really going to get it. So we're going to talk more about that idea of testing and therefore valuing both content and processes. That's going to come up in a big way in Unit 4. But before we get to Unit 4, we have Unit 2. So just a quick overview of that. Unit 2 deals with summative assessment and then especially formative assessment. So summative assessment, I think of it as the static measures of students' knowledge or skills. And then formative assessment is richer. It's providing frequent feedback to students about their learning, and it's also using information about students to help you as a teacher make instructional decisions. And research has shown that formative assessment practices are very positively related to student learning. In fact, formative assessment is one of the most positive aspects of instruction that we've been able to measure and identify in the research literature. We've looked at lots of things in practice because teaching is very complicated business, but formative assessment kind of comes out basically at the head of the pack in terms of things that have a positive relationship on measurable student learning. So it's definitely worth us taking a look at. We're going to start doing that in Unit 2, and we're actually going to look at it again in a later unit. But for Unit 2, it's already underway. There's 2 readings and 2 discussions, and the readings hopefully you can get to this week. The discussions should start this week and then continue next week. And then there is an assignment that's due at the end of the unit. It's about trying out this My Favorite No formative assessment practice. And then at the very end, there is a personal reflection that we want to have you turn into us, where you do some self-assessment of your own assessment practices. So that's a quick overview of Unit 2. If you have any questions, let me know or Kimberly know, and we will look forward to seeing you online.